Welcome to everybody who's joining us virtually today. Also, as Inakshi already introduced, this is the first virtual chapter of Lands, Borders, and People, and we'll be doing a deep dive today with the experts on our panel on international law and the politics of displacement. And all of this keeping South Asia front and center of this discussion. As you know, I'm Priyali Sur. I'm the founder ED of the Azadi Project, which is also the collaborating partner of Asia Society India Center on this series. Just a little bit about myself. I've been researching and writing about migration and refugees, and also creating safe spaces for displaced people globally for almost a decade now. What I have noticed is that when it comes to migration and asylum seekers, South Asia is often missing from the global discussion. And as someone from South Asia, this region is of great interest to me, but that's not why you or anyone here today should be paying attention to this region. South Asia, when looked at from the prism of conflict, climate, and migration, is extremely significant on a global level. This is the most populous region in the world and has 1/4 of the entire global population. It is also a region that has unfortunately been rocked by conflict repeatedly and has the world's top climate displacement hotspots. All of this ultimately leading to mass-scale movement of people across borders from one land to another. So today our focus will be, are the countries in this region prepared to handle this in a manner that upholds the rights of the people on the move? What legal frameworks do they have in place? And do the politics of the region, be it ethno-nationalism or anti-minority policies, affect the way countries receive and treat asylum seekers? We have a wonderful panel today, and let me start by introducing our panel, and then we'll get into the panel discussion. Soon after the panel discussion, I'll come to anybody who has questions. You can post your questions in the chat. You can also raise your hand. Our first panelist today is Ujjaini Chatterji. She's a human rights lawyer, and she's also the founder of the Lingering Shadows Initiative, which visits migrant workers and refugee communities and provides legal consultations, representation, and training. We also have Ali Johar with us. He's a refugee himself and is also an activist. He co-founded the Rohingya Human Rights Initiative, a community-based support and campaign organization. He is originally from Myanmar and is also a current fellow at Refugees International. Also joining us today is Dr. J. Ramasubramanyam, who's an assistant professor at York University in Toronto. He teaches and researches in the area of refuge and forced migration studies. He was a former practitioner at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or popularly called the UNHCR. I'm going to start with you, Jay, first. When we talk about the Refugee Convention and the signatories of the Refugee Convention, most countries in South Asia, the region we are talking about and focusing today on, are not signatories of the Refugee Convention. But let's focus a little bit initially on India. India has historically been deemed as a safe haven for refugees. So what made India not sign the Refugee Convention? Why do you think India has stayed away from it?
Thank you, Priyali, and thank you everyone for joining, and also for a wonderful introduction. And I think it segues quite nicely from what you said earlier, especially considering India is missing from narratives around refugee studies or even the academic studies around forced migration. To answer your question, India has initially positioned itself as a safe haven for refugees. What it did initially after the formal end to colonialism, which also coincided with the establishment of, say, new international borders, and of course, even the 1951 convention, was the fact that the international community did not consider what was happening in South Asia as an event of forced migration. Basically, it was viewed as an exchange of populations. That is something that's organic, and it happened as a result of, say, the partition of India. And of course, I don't think it's lost on any of us that the partition of India did result in massive displacement and, of course, deaths across the newly created borders. Both India and Pakistan arrived at the negotiation process with a lot of enthusiasm and in light of the situation that they were facing. Both states face tremendous challenges in responding to the protection needs of the displaced, which had to then eventually manifest in extraordinary interventions. And there was one quote that I remember, the defense minister, former defense minister, V.K. Krishna Menon, said that the outstanding overall impression that was left on his mind was that there was a very limited reference to the internal problems and difficulties that India and Pakistan was facing. And as a result, the engagement with the formal drafting process of the Refugee Convention may not have a massive impact on what is happening in South Asia. But as I mentioned earlier, India and Pakistan attempted to engage constructively with the formal drafting process of what was to become the Refugee Convention. Both states expressed some concerns on various issues, most importantly, the refugee definition. There was one particular representative from Pakistan who was of the opinion that the definition should not be limited by any territorial boundaries, and expressed some hope that the scope of the definition would be extended to cover the people who were displaced as a result of the partition of India, and also would be adequately representing those people who have been displaced outside of the boundaries of Europe. And India and Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations requested that the convention address some racial and religious discrimination issues that was directed towards people, but they were constantly met with resistance, which resulted in their disillusionment with the convention and also with the UNHCR's mandate. India specifically stated that the objections they raised confirmed their belief that there were fundamental differences that existed in the mandate of the Refugee Convention and what India and Pakistan envisioned. That resulted in both states stepping away from the formal negotiation process, which then resulted in ad hoc mechanisms to protect refugees. I will leave it at that for now, and I'm sure we can pick up a few more discussions. Thank you.
Thanks for that, detailed and a quick background history to this. Ujjaini, I'm coming to you now. Now, fast forward since 1951 and then the 1967 protocol to 2023, right? So India does not have a refugee policy or a refugee law in place. So what are the mechanisms, the protection mechanisms, be it laws or policies? And I'm asking you about India because you work in the India context. We'll obviously speak about, the region in general later. But currently in India, in 2023, what are the policies, the protection policies, the laws that are in place for refugees or asylum seekers?
Right. So I'll first talk a little about the international conventions from the point of view of the 1951 convention. Of course, we're not party to the 1951 convention, but we are parties to a lot of other international instruments like ICCPR, the Child Rights Convention, various other CEDAW, and they all have certain provisions for asylum seekers and displaced communities per se. Now, the implementation of international law in India happens through the Constitution. It passes through the Constitution, and that's when the implementation of our commitments and obligations done internationally are done within the territorial jurisdiction of India. Now, when I essentially argue a case of any refugee person, including the Rohingya refugees that I represent, I take it from the point of view of the Constitution of India. Because the Constitution has two very, very important provisions, one being the right to life and the other being equality before law. Now, this is kind of adequately established, whether it's judgments or just the bare reading of the provisions. Right to life is synonymous with non-refoulement. Non-refoulement basically says that one cannot be pushed back to a place where there is justified and well-founded fear of persecution, which is precisely what Article 21 of the Indian Constitution says, that no steps can be taken in order to, which brings a danger to the right to life of any person. And the words used in the Constitution is any person. So it does not say citizen. So it is anybody within the territory of India. Sure, we are not participants or we are not signatories to the 1951 convention, but that does not take away our obligations to respecting these basic rights of human dignity or human right to life and not just pushing people away in danger. So that's something that's very much existent and more or less accepted by courts. I think even the most difficult orders that we've gotten from the courts, the Supreme Court, I mean, there have been orders which have taken us back in terms of protection. But even those orders have gone on record to state that, of course, right to life is something that's available to everybody within the territory of India. Now, there are also, yeah, sorry.
I'll come back to you, Jenny, on this again. But I just to reiterate what you're saying, that even though there's not a refugee law or a refugee policy as per in India, the Constitution of India has enough provisions in it in terms of right to life, which guarantees anybody, whether that person is a citizen, whether that person is a refugee or a migrant, economic migrant, whatever, two basic right to life and human rights, right? Okay, so Ali, I'm coming to you now. You have lived experience of being a refugee, but you have also worked a lot for refugees specifically from your community. You have been known to say that there's a lack of protection laws, not just in India, but countries in the region, be it Bangladesh or be it Malaysia. Can you elaborate on that? Can you tell us why you feel that way?
Thank you for the question. I'm really happy to be among the panelists and to have this opportunity to express my experience. So as Jay said, the refugee protection policies globally and the 1951 convention, it's more like Europe-centric, and the Asia's perspectives are not being included in most way. And also the diverse situation that Asia has, especially the South Asia has, it's so unique. And also, Ujjaini was mentioning about the protection in India. So if I slightly, highlight on that, India has been, although India did not sign the 1951 convention or it's not party to the 1967 protocol, it is sitting in the, executive committee of UNHCR, interestingly, since 1995. And it is really, lame to say that India doesn't have any obligation when, politicians try to claim it. But also why the refugee protection in South Asia is very weak is because if we talk about global refugee regime, it has a very strong protection, mechanism. But when it comes to, burden sharing, it is not really strong enough. So when we also talk about ethical grounds of the commitment, and then the country comes with their interest, values, and obligations. But although most of the South Asian countries, except this Afghanistan, did not sign the 1951 convention, they always refer the 1951 convention as an excuse to exclude the refugees from protection. So I think that is the that is the regional phenomena that's stopping refugees to be receiving their deserved protection and dignity. And also it cannot be an excuse. Refugees are fleeing from a dangerous situation, just to save their lives. And also there are a lot of misconceptions and misinformation about the refugees that are being spreaded by the countries who does not want to participate in the refugee protection regime. So I think that's also another issues where the countries are failing to protect the much needed community that deserve a dignified protection.
Yeah. So, Ali, I'm going to stay with you for just another minute or two. And, if you can just try and answer this next question quickly. In your response, you constantly mention about the countries failing to protect the refugees. Can you give us examples of what you mean by failing to protect refugees?
So, for example, if I worked in India for almost a decade, so India, if I give an example, I'm not just going to a particular country, but I'm just giving an example. India says Rohingyas are an illegal migrant community since 2017. Although since 2014 onward, India has given, protection to Rohingya refugees on a prima facie category. Why I'm saying failure to protect is India signed, although India did not sign 1951 convention, legally India is bound to protect Rohingyas because India signed Genocide Convention and United Nations, United States, Canada has officially declared Rohingyas as a victim of genocide. So on one base, if India is saying they did not sign 1951 convention, they did sign Genocide Convention where they are internationally obligated to protect this community. They cannot just say, they are illegal immigrants. So same when it comes to Malaysia, it comes to Bangladesh, they're always trying to focus, shift the focus of the people that see we did not sign the 1951 convention, we don't have enough resource, which is also another another not very satisfactory answer, because I see Asia being one of the richest region because many people who have experience of living in Europe will echo with me that life even in Europe is more expensive. The earning you can do there, the living you have here, it's much richer than most of the developed countries. So this is another excuse also, just to deny the protection that the refugee deserve. That's why I'm trying to mention the word. It's a failure to protect, and just to blanket that failure to protect, countries are coming up with these excuses that they are coming up.
So it's very interesting that you say failure to protect. And I'm going to widen this out. And Jay, I'm going to come to you on this. We've seen this regional failure to protect very strongly and very obviously and rather starkly when the boats leave from Bangladesh, full of Rohingya refugees, right? We've seen, especially last year, in fact, this is a phenomena that repeats every year. The boats are full of Rohingya refugees leaving from Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar, their engines fail. And none of the countries in the region, be it Malaysia or India or even Thailand and Indonesia, I think finally most of them ultimately go to Indonesia, but most of them kind of don't want to disembark them. They push them back into the international waters. So as an observer sitting in North America and looking at this region, what are your observations in terms of what Ali said, failure to protect in a more regional context?
That's a very good question. And I think the spirit of the convention is perhaps for everyone to seek protection wherever they want. And at least that's what the Refugee Convention initially promised. And that's what the 1967 protocol then, I want to say, begrudgingly accommodated refugees from other parts of the world. As Ali mentioned, the Eurocentrism of the Refugee Convention is very clear. And the 1967 protocol basically opened the doors for other refugees to be accommodated as well. However, I think the convention is also not applicable as seamlessly as one would think, because institutions like UNHCR are still heavily dependent on states to be able to do their work effectively. The mandate of the UNHCR is intricately connected to how the state accommodates an institution like UNHCR to be able to work on their territory. So yes, as somebody who is sitting here being passionate about human rights, being passionate about refugee rights, was to see something like this happen, it's gut-wrenching. But at the same time, it also takes us back to the root of the issue, which is, why does the UNHCR not have a clear mandate? That is because they require states to be able to do their work. And many times, unfortunately, and this is a reality, they tend to act according to the whims of massive states like the United States, because they are one of the heaviest donors to the UNHCR. They contribute over $1.6 billion every year to UNHCR. So many times the policies that the UNHCR tend to apply are very selective. Just to give you a very quick example, and I'm going to conclude after that with this question. In the 80s, when Tamil refugees were being forcibly displaced from Sri Lanka, they were making their way to Europe. States like the Netherlands, Switzerland, France decided to not consider them as refugees or as forced migrants. The UNHCR was unable to wield their power over states like France or the Netherlands. And it's quite ironic that these were the states that were the initial drafters of the 1951 convention. They were the ones who were so passionate about the fact that something needs to be done about refugees after the end of the Second World War. But when it came to their own experience, or when it came to their own willingness to accept refugees from outside Europe, they decided against it. So the UNHCR was unable to wield its power over these states. So you're absolutely right. There is a failure to protect, and there is a failure of the institution as such. And this is what I tell my students, and it's quite difficult for them to hear, when they're passionate about refugee rights and they want to work in institutions like UNHCR or the International Organization for Migration. I tell them, I'm sorry to break the news to you, but these institutions have been failing refugees from the start. The genesis of these institutions was based on a very skewed and extremely myopic idea of who a refugee is. It did not take into account some of the other experiences of refugees, perhaps even considering colonialism as a reason for many of these problems that are continuing even to this day. So when we are sitting here in a very safely ensconced location with a great deal of privilege, yes, it's gut-wrenching to see refugees not being able to get adequate protection. But unfortunately, the institutions are built that way. And unless we commit ourselves to perhaps dismantling those extremely myopic practices and dismantling those institutional constraints, we may not be able to see the light of the day.
So Jay, you make such a good point there. And Ujjaini, I'm going to come to you now. In terms of the limitations of the UNHCR and how they're reliant in terms of the state, in terms of the government and the policies of the state in which they are functioning. So Ujjaini, from the cases and from the people you speak to on the ground and the people who you represent in court, most of them have UNHCR refugee cards, right? And yet it is not recognized as a valid document in many cases. Can you tell us a little bit about that and about also quickly about, how these UNHCR cards, despite having them, have failed to prevent unlawful and indefinite detention of refugees?
Priyali, I'll just start from where I left last time. We were speaking about the laws and the policies of India, right? So alongside the constitution provisions, etc., India regularly comes up with standard operating procedures. With our law minister also went in the parliament and said that we don't follow the Refugee Convention, but the laws that India is making are in the form of standard operating procedures. Now, they say from time to time about foreigners who are claiming to be refugees and how they have to be there's going to be a determination process and how they're going to figure out whether they're refugees, and if they're refugees, they would be given long-term visas. Now, this kind of overlaps a little with the political and the policy happenings of the country as well, but I'll just try sticking to the laws, because that's the best way of dealing with this. Because if we go with politics, we kind of open a floodgate, which is very difficult to handle. So one of the determining factors of a prima facie case of somebody being a refugee is the UN refugee card. And I'm not saying this. This is something that I can show you a printout of the website of the Immigration Bureau of India, which says that if you do not have a valid passport, you give us your UN card, or maybe a slip which is saying that your determination process is underway. There, about the accountability of UNHCR, which I feel comes to play a role, is that one, they're extremely slow in their process of completing the determination, giving the cards and finishing their processes. And two, even when they do it, there is no accountability about what they are doing with the cases which are being referred to them. In the sense that a lot of my clients have repeatedly tried to reach out to the UNHCR, and I have also in my initial days in my career tried to reach out to the UNHCR to just figure out, are their lawyers working on this, and if they are, what is the status of the case? There is no way to find out. And there have been refugees who have gone to the offices to speak about their cases, but they have not found the chance to get a meeting with the concerned persons. People have moved cities, the lawyers have gone away. That's when I think the United Nations system overall requires an accountability mechanism which is more working, but UNHCR particularly, because there have been allegations in Bangladesh by Rohingyas in Bangladesh and also the Uyghur Muslims that their personal data have been leaked to people who it should not reach. And I also feel there is a sense of a bit of that charity model that keeps coming to play a role, kind of like we're throwing you some services. It's great that UNHCR exists and they're doing the work that they're doing, but the idea that it's a profession and we need to do our job in a way that we are able to outline what is supposed to be done is something which I have personally found missing while on the ground. And I once had a client of mine who wanted to write a letter and wanted a help from me. He wanted to write to the UNHCR, and I thought it's going to be a very technical letter. But when I sat down to write the letter, it was a very heart-wrenching, it was a very heartfelt letter. He's obviously not a lawyer or a politician to write something very technical. He said that, we have lost our homes, we have nowhere to go back to, and the only parents or protection people we can look up to is the UNHCR. So when you do not respond to my calls or reply to me, I feel lost. So please.
Okay, but, I understand all of that, Jenny, but again, I want to say that obviously is a function of the UNHCR, but it's more a function of the location the UNHCR is. And, I think they have been, UNHCR has limited powers, and it has to kind of work around the parameters of the country or the state they work in. And I think that's what Jay highlighted. Ali, I want to come to you now and to know about these limitations that happen on the ground. Despite having a UNHCR refugee card, what are the things that refugees cannot access, even though they have the right to access? Can you share some anecdotal stories of refugees or refugees you work with who haven't been allowed access to basic things despite having a UNHCR card or despite having the required documentation?
So, as Ujjaini rightly mentioned, at the same time, as a state failure to protect, beside that, the UNHCR and other agencies who are to protect the refugees there should have some sort of accountability. I strongly believe in this because this experience of not getting even any reply, even I have had the same experience with UN agencies when, for myself as well as working for other refugees, I was in the ground. So I'll particularly give an example of one case where they were entitled to have the protection, but did not. So as Ujjaini also rightly mentioned, there are questions to be raised about the quality of legal services that are being provided to refugees by partner organization of the UNHCR. I went to a place called New Jalpaiguri at the top, on the top of the West Bengal, where there were a group of 14 people were detained. And I went there in the beginning of 2020, just after they were detained. So I managed to make a court order to meet these people. And there I discovered 3 more groups of refugees to whom a lawyer that was from an implementing partner of the UNHCR was following up since 3 years. But this lawyer doesn't even know that UNHCR should at least issue some sort of documents to them that this lawyer can show at the court. So now if we see whose failure is this failure of that lawyer representing this group of people, or it is a failure of the UNHCR? Because when I asked this lawyer, she said, I have been informing UNHCR about these people since 3 years. So, we literally had to, create pressure to, get these people documentation. Eventually, all these refugees who were detained under this particular detention or a jail was all, released after we hire a private lawyer and release the group. I went to meet there, and later on, with that court order, all the other 3 groups were also released. But among the 3 groups, there were one group where 3 minor girls were there and 1 minor teenage boy. And when this group was released, they were handed over to the community. They approached the community. And the community approached the implementing partners for these girls because they have no relatives, no immediate family members in India. Now, where do they go for their protection, physical protection? So they were released from the detention. Now the challenge is their physical protection. So finding no proper solution for these teenage girls, underage girls, community only found the solution as a forced marriage in the community as a protection solution. So now whose failure is this? Is this a state failure or the organization that are there with, fund to protect these particular minors? So eventually 3 of these girls were forced to marriage, and I have since then following these people. So from among 14 people whom I advocated for release, for all of them, we found family members, relatives to connect them. But for particularly one girl who was 19 years old, we couldn't find any family members, immediate family members. Then the community advised, I cannot hand over from that experience that these 3 girls were forced to get married with much older people in the community. I cannot trust the community now even to hand over this girl to community members. So I had to literally host that girl for 3 months. Then I found a family which is far away, far relative from her mother's side. That family lives in Hyderabad. So I approached child protection committee in Delhi and made an agreement that this girl should be protected under any circumstance and should be reported to UNHCR partner Save the Children in Hyderabad after she is there, and education, housing, everything should be under this family's responsibility. And this family should be obligated to show her to UNHCR whenever it is required. But while she was traveling to Hyderabad, she was detained again at the Nizamuddin railway station. And since then, she is at a detention center in Delhi with no one following up her case. So this particular detention in Delhi For other detention, like in Jammu, there are more than 300 people detained. In other like regions like West Bengal and Assam, there are also around a number of 300 people are detained. These all people are framed under some sort of, visa violation or passport act. But for Delhi particularly, where initially 89 people were detained, and later on the police and the FRRO went after arbitrarily before the community, including this girl. It went around 100 people. Now there are around 26, 28 people, including this girl. But for these people, no frame has been charged, so that even court procedure is, very, very challenged, because without a frame, you cannot even go to a court for legal means. Like Ujjaini is, representing such cases now. It's even difficult for lawyers to prove that these people are actually in a detention, although they are in a detention, because government claims that these people are not in a detention, they are instead in a welfare house. Now, UNHCR echo with the government statement that these people are in a welfare house. So again, also when it comes to the obligations, also UNHCR role, sometimes it's really questionable. Recent repatriation deal between Bangladesh and Myanmar. Right. For Myanmar delegation, which is a representation from the military regime, which is not recognized by the United Nations, was provided equipments like transportations by UNHCR to come to Bangladesh and meet refugees. On these vehicles, these unrecognized illegal government carried weapons for their protections.
Ali, thanks for sharing this. As tragic as these stories are, I think another challenge is that a lot of them are not even aware that they can have access to any kind of legal recourse, and even if they can, how can they approach it? But since we have just last 5 minutes left on this panel before we open it out to questions, I just want to come to what's the way forward. And Jay, I'm going to start with you, and then Ujjaini, come to you, and Ali, quickly for you. So just like a minute each. There clearly is a lack of accountability from all the stakeholders, right? And because there's a lack of accountability, there's a failure to ultimately provide protection to these vulnerable refugees. So what is the solution? What is the way forward? Should countries like the United States be coming in and talking, or should there be a regional understanding between all these countries in this region that they come forward with a particular law that everybody adheres to, a particular policy that everybody adheres to? Jay?
Thank you, Priyali. Oh, that's a very, very massive question, and we perhaps need a separate session for that. But I would like to echo what Ali and Ujjaini have been saying about the lack of accountability, institutional accountability, state accountability from individuals who are representing these refugees who are in a truly vulnerable state. I want to quickly also say something about the process of the UNHCR, which Ujjaini very clearly mentioned as to their refugee status determination process. It's one of the most invasive procedures that is out there. I have been in that process as an adjudicator, and I could very clearly see the pain that these refugees are going through, and to ask them some of the most invasive questions in an environment that is closed completely. And when I was in the UNHCR, they were not allowed to have legal representatives, and I think that has changed now. But at that moment, all that was left for the refugees was an interpreter and someone like me, who was 25 years old and had to make these decisions on their life. And that is a very clear violation, because there is no protection when it comes to the process itself. So the refugee status determination procedure itself is something that needs to be looked at much more clearly. In terms of solutions, we can think about a ton of solutions. Community support is one of the most effective solutions. And I'm sure Ali would be able to speak to that, and I'm sure he has experienced it himself in many ways, the community does come to the support of refugees. But that is a very, very flimsy way to perhaps pass up on some of our own responsibilities as states and also as individuals and also as an institution. The judiciary is also a very key element in all of this. Most recently, in 2021, the Supreme Court decided that the executive order to deport Rohingya refugees was valid. And that was basically the nail in the coffin when it came to, the restrictive and constrained approaches to refugee protection in India. But there are courts in states that are perhaps, overlooking that and making sure that these refugees are adequately protected. So the judiciary is another key element. So, yeah, I could go on.
Yeah, I have to, sorry, I have to cut you short so that I can give
no, of course.
the final words to Ujjaini and to Ali. We really just have 2 to 3 minutes. Ujjaini, community support, while a great thing, can be very ad hoc, right? So, should we be looking at country-wise laws, like all the refugees in one country, for example, India, come under the blanket of that one law? Should we be looking at a regional law, or the judiciary should be stronger? What's your solution?
Well, I'm going to give a solution as a litigator. And of course, all of you here in the panel, while speaking about, from an academic point of view, as a journalist, as policy analyst, you have a lot of effort in creating the laws, and people like me are the ones who go to the court and challenge these laws. Like we just talked about the 21 judgment. As a matter of fact, I had annexed that in one of my cases to say that, sure, it says you can deport, but in the end, there is a word which say by following the established due process of law. So deportation by due process of law means they have to verify that someone is a citizen of some country, which means the other country has to give me a passport and arrange for my travel documents, which means the war ends and I go back home happy. So if you follow that, then don't deport me and throw me in in probably a human trafficking racket, which hopefully the country does not want to be a part of. And I think the interventions, legal interventions, but the legal interventions have to be done very strategically. We have to think over, and most of the time wear the hat of the other side and think what I am going to do if I'm on the other side and how we can find loopholes in our strategies. So I think that's the immediate thing we can do.
Okay. Ali, last one to you. What do you think should be done? What's the way forward so that generation and generation of refugees, your parents, your future kids, and the generations after that are not seen as stateless aliens and actually have protection and rights?
I think the only solution is state realizing that refugee situation has been there since human generation. It is there and it will be there. So lacking of a law cannot be a solution. There should be a protection mechanism, how we handle it. In a time when now refugee situation is not only limited to fear of persecution, now we have global warming, environmental issues, state fragility. So when we are having increased situation of refugee protection, we must realize that there should be a mechanism to protect these people who are fleeing to save their lives. And also the misinformation that refugees are burdened, this should be look otherwise, because refugees are not burdened. Resilience strategies can be really helpful, like self-resilience strategies. For an example, Uganda, for example, they have a very beautiful policy of creating self-resilience refugees. They have not restricted movement of the refugees, and they have given refugees right to do business in the country. Now, the area where refugees are staying, 40% of the local people are finding, economical opportunities that refugees have created job. So refugees are actually, adding
to the economy,
asset for a country when you think, look, and politicize positively. So I think that's the only solution.
Okay, so I hope the policymakers are somehow listening to this, because some great solutions coming out here, which obviously is going to be documented, because this discussion is going to be ultimately on YouTube. And yeah, we will try and send it out to people who should be listening to this.